Welcome to the One Deeper podcast. The following is a conversation with Dr. Jeffrey Evans. To read out the entirety of his bio would constitute another episode in and of itself. He's an engineer, educator, musician, father, and husband. Dr. Evans taught me at Purdue, and beyond his technical expertise, what struck me was his motivation to try and help me find a path that would give my life meaning. He was not just interested in teaching me the material, he was motivated to help me grow as a person, regardless of where it took me. It was one of the most impactful educational experiences of my life, and I try to carry that gift forward to everyone I encounter. In this conversation, we speak about finding a path in life, making difficult decisions, information theory, the ethics of engineering, and much more. There's something in here for everyone. So, without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Jeffrey Evans. I don't edit anything out, but like I do just do some, basic cleaning up noises and background noises, etc., etc. But other than that, it's
Right.
everything's like I try to keep the spirit of this medium in the sense that like it's just a conversation between people, and like you know like if you like if you don't want to listen to it, you don't have to, right? Like if something is like if something that we talk like gets spoken on here, get like, because this is a concern like I guess people had when coming on the show in the first place. They were like, what are you going to talk about? And I'm like, look, uh, like I'm going to talk about things that I'm interested in, and sometimes they're not, I don't know, like it might offend people, I guess, but like I'm just curious and I want to know how this whole thing works, right? um but before we
Right.
get started,
Right.
I've been telling my friends here about you, and like I just want you to give a basic introduction, because like your bio is ridiculous. Right? You've been basically all over the place. But right, so I'll let you
Yeah.
start,
That's a
and
good
then
way to put it.
I'll ask you some questions. But where do you want to start off from? Like, where do you think a good jumping off point is for your life?
Um, so
So, all right.
ask
Okay,
that
you know
question
what? I'll
again.
ask you
What
the
do you want
question
to
I want to
know?
ask you. All right, let's start with music, okay? Because
Okay.
because I couldn't find
Oh, okay.
your music.
Okay.
I
So
was
want to
like,
go.
damn it,
Okay.
I just want to listen to some music. So you have to send me your music after this conversation so I can listen to it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, hang
Oh,
on.
perfect. That'll be great.
I'll send you the
That'll be great.
SoundCloud link. You can, so the one album that I did in roughly 1990, it was a smooth jazz album, instrumental,
How
kind
did
of
that
thing. But
start? How did the
anyway,
music start? Like
um,
when?
musically, yeah, I basically, um, it really started my junior and senior year of high school. I had been playing the trumpet since I was in sixth grade, but it was the
Hmm.
typical thing you play in like concert band and that kind of stuff, and it's pretty uneventful. And then I won an award in 1976. Um, I was voted outstanding musician at a jazz festival that actually happened to be at Purdue University in 1976, and it was all these high schools from all over the state came in. And the guy that handed me the plaque, which I still have today, his name is Marvin Stamm. He is one of the he's you could count him on two hands, some of the greatest trumpet players on the planet, and he's one of them. He's been around a long time. Um, he's played with everybody: Paul McCartney, the
That's
Beatles.
insane.
Paul McCartney and others, of that era. So, I mean, he's
Yeah, I just
wonderful.
took.
You can look him up on YouTube.
I
He's a
just wrote down his
brilliant,
name.
brilliant
So like,
player.
I'm also taking copious notes. It's because I want to keep track of all this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, so that inspired me to go and try to audition for to be a music performance major. I wanted nothing to
Right.
do with music education. I wanted to perform. I wanted to be a performer. And um, I in the process of doing that, I didn't get accepted to my primary school that I wanted to go to, which
How
was
dare you?
Indiana University. They're renowned for their music school, their jazz school, that type of
Yeah.
stuff. And I didn't get in. And so I was really disappointed and didn't know what I was going to do. And this was like we're in the summer after my senior year, so I've got like 2 or 3 months to figure this out. Um, and some band directors in the county, I started taking serious trumpet lessons, and that player has since passed away, but he's kind of one of my musical idols. But um, they they kind of put their heads together, and they had three schools that I could go to. One was in Minnesota, one was in Kentucky, and the other one was in Jacksonville, Florida. So, being an 18-year-old, um, you can
Mm-hmm.
imagine the atmosphere at a college in Florida in those days. It was the 70s, so I picked Florida, and it was a small school, and I got to play in everything. I got to do everything. Every kind of band you could imagine. I played with Bob Hope. He's a legendary entertainer. Um, Actually, he started in vaudeville and did a lot of stuff, the USO tours
Right.
during
Right.
some of the wars and that kind of stuff. You can look him up too. Um, Very famous person. So I did that for a couple of years, and it was the 70s. There were some things that were scaring me. So I had always gravitated
Mm-hmm.
towards the sound systems,
Right.
and setting up the sound systems for performances and stuff, and because I was playing in rock bands and doing that kind of stuff. So I kind of did this left turn and went into engineering technology and um, ended up going to school closer to home. It was
Right.
one of the satellite campuses of Purdue, um, so I could drive back and forth. I could work while I was going to school, and better than that, I could kind of pay my tuition, do all that kind of stuff. Um, so you know, I did that. Um, Got married in the process, and moved to the suburbs of Chicago to start working, but I also the summer I got married, I think my wife saw an ad in the one of the Chicago papers and said maybe you should go audition
Go
for
ahead.
this rock band. They're looking for a trumpet player, and I was like, well, why not? So I
Nice.
called the number and I got the gig. So it was a 8-piece horn, and we played rock music. I mean, it was great. We played all the biggest clubs in Chicago. We played them. We played large private
So this
parties.
is
We
while
were making
you were
really good
studying.
money,
While you were
and
oh,
this
okay.
uh, while I was working. Yeah, yeah, while I was working. Um, and so as things evolved, as they always do, with bands and stuff. There were guys in the band that had families. There were guys in the band that had one guy worked for the city of Chicago, so he had this
Mm-hmm.
really secure job. He and his wife didn't have any kids at the time, but he had this really secure job. And there was talk about going on the road and backing up, a
Right.
major headlining act, of the time, and that was kind of a fork in the road. All of us kind of had to make hard decisions, and ultimately we ended up not doing that. So I started kind of dabbling on my own, doing a little bit more writing. Um, a couple of the guys that were left, you know, we did some other types of music and did that kind of stuff. Um, and then around, I don't know, it was around
So
1989,
wait, hold on, hold on,
1990. I
hold
was
on.
still working as an engineer,
How did you have time to do?
and
How did you wait? How did you
yeah.
get your engineering feat while you were doing all this stuff? Like,
I was going to school. I was going to school and working. Um, so those days were completely full.
right,
You'd go to school during the day and work at night. Whatever. Um, my wife and I used to meet
right.
once a week because she was doing the same thing. She was going to school, she was working. Our schedules were more or less incompatible with each other, so we really didn't kind of see each other except for rare occasions. And we'd go to this place whenever
Right.
we could, and we'd go sit down and have a piece of pie. That was our thing, and it was once a week or two, or whenever we could kind of get together. Um, and then I started working. I got out of college and started working, and the first job I
Right.
had was at Bell Telephone Laboratories. So they don't exist anymore, but it was at the time considered one of the safest and most secure and
They were
most
AT&T.
elite places
They
on the
became
planet
AT&T
that
at some
one
point,
could
right?
work.
Yeah.
AT&T. Yep, 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 yep. And it was right when the divestiture of AT&T happened. So things were kind of upended and confused, and nobody really knew what was going to happen next and all that kind of good stuff. Um, so that job was actually as
Right.
close to a kind of 9 to 5 job as I ever had. So I could go do the playing at night. So basically, my life schedule never really changed all that much. I would be working or going to school during the day, and then doing something else working or going to school at night. So now I'm working during the day, and then 2 or 3 nights a week I'd be rehearsing with this rock band, and then 2 or 3 nights a week I'd be playing out with this rock
Mhm.
band. So it was the same thing. Yeah, it's just you're kind of consumed. So your days are going from, I don't know, um, 5 or 6 in the morning until midnight, and then rinse and repeat.
Man, you're
You,
making me
you,
sound
you know you
making me
you
look bad. Like
you do
you're making
that,
me
and
sound like like a
there
lazy
were
slump at this point.
well, and that actually that was a thing that, and we'll get to this probably later, but some of my grad students actually didn't really like about me,
Yeah.
because when they would complain that they didn't have time for something, I would go into, let me tell you a couple of stories about time. Yeah, and so I mean, it actually gets worse, believe it or not, because when yeah, so the music thing kind of culminated in about 1990 or so. I was asked, well, there was a song or two on my record that got on a compilation record in the city of Chicago, and I actually made some money, and I think I made my biggest BMI check.
What?
I want to say it was from Venezuela. Um, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's crazy. I mean, I couldn't make any royalty money or anything in the U.S. And I couldn't even get the stuff played. Um, but once it got distributed
That's
internationally, it
amazing.
was like, oh, people thought this was a good song. It was like, okay, fine, cool. So, that was the early '90s, and we the music
Mhm.
thing, I hit a fork in the road. It was like a major fork in the road, and it was like, do you keep pursuing this? Because at that point, I 93, I
Wait,
had two
you also
kids.
had two
We had
kids
two little
while all this was
girls.
happening? How? What? In that's ridiculous, man.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, during
Mhm.
during the 80s, I was doing some traveling on business, so I was squeezing that stuff kind of stuff in. Um, and so you had that going. We had two kids in the late 80s, and then 90, 91, my record came out. Um, we and then this I was contacted by these guys in the city about this compilation record, and I said, yeah, fine, that's fine. We did that, and then the band, I guess the main attraction, I guess, for this compilation record, um, their band lost their keyboard player, and they were getting ready to go on the road to the UK. It was for several weeks. It wasn't like months or
Right.
any of that kind of stuff. So they asked me to fill in. So it's this kind of blues band from Chicago, and they were pretty good. Um, Good, strong vocal, good guitar player, good bass player, really good drummer. Um, and I wasn't even playing my horn. I was playing keyboards. So that's one of the things you have to learn as a music major. You have to learn a little bit about how to play piano and that kind of stuff. So I end up going on the road with them for, I think it was 2 to 3 weeks. So I used up all my vacation, all the allotted vacation I had with the company I was working for. I said, hey, I'd really like
How?
to do
Hold
this.
on,
And
I
they
need to
said, yeah,
interrupt you.
go ahead.
Like,
That was before.
how did you convince
Yeah,
this
go ahead.
human female to put up with all this? Like, she's no sane
Um,
person.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really good question. Um, Actually, we've
Right.
always worked really, really well as a team. Um, she's she's an accountant, and so she's a numbers person. Um, she's very, very strong with like day-to-day operations and that kind of stuff. Um, and we also made the decision after our second daughter was born that it was literally close to a coin flip, because at that time she was working, I was working, and we were both
Mhm.
making about the same money. It was just within a couple $1,000s, per year. Um, so we kind of made this decision. We were going through daycare options and things like that, and we
Right.
said, this just doesn't feel right. So it was darn near a coin flip, and but she decided she would like to stay home. So he said, "Yeah, fine, let's do it.
Right.
If you hate staying home with the kids, you can always go back to work." And that was a thing. And she ended up staying home with the kids, and so I was still kind of running around doing this, because all of that money that I was
Right.
making from music, that would pay for our vacations and stuff.
Right.
So we took some decent vacations, with the kids, so that's kind of how that worked out. We would bank that money and, do that kind of stuff. Because literally,
Mhm.
I mean, think about it, you're cutting your income in half. That took a couple years to kind of recover from that and get used to that. The good
Right.
news was we didn't have a lot of debt and, that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, so she's, yeah, I don't know. You'd probably have to ask her. She's out for a walk right now with one of the neighbors, and but now that you asked that question, I'm thinking about
Yeah.
that and go, huh? How did she put up with all that? That's a really good question. Um, so yeah, so we do this tour in England. We're in London. We do 3 or 4 shows. We're in Liverpool. We do the Cavern Club. We do places like that, and
Hold
that
on.
was a lot of
Doctor, I
fun.
was
We
like,
do
I
Leeds
gotta, I
and
gotta interrupt you
and
for
that
one
kind of
second. There,
stuff. And we
1 second. Hold on. 1 second. I'm gonna pause this. We'll be right back.
okay. So at that time, we, the family, had some things to consider, and the one thing that was becoming painfully obvious is that if I was going to try to make a career in music, being a performer or entertainer, that kind of thing, then we would either have to move to Europe, or I would have to basically be on the road there probably 9, 10 months out of the year. That was kind of the choice that we were facing, and even at that, it was a gamble. But the audiences were much more friendly,
Right.
in Europe, and so this was now 1990. At this point, it was 1993, 94, and it was probably the hardest decision that I'd ever made in my life. I put my horn down and stopped playing, cold turkey.
What? You haven't played?
Yeah, I stopped. It was on Christmas Day, in
That's
fact.
crazy.
I was practicing every single day. You're practicing, 365, that kind of thing, and several hours a day to keep your chops up and all that kind of stuff. And naturally, when you that big of a void sort of leaves you, you've got this huge kind of chunk of time, just kind of sitting there.
Right.
So I was doing things like, I'd finish the basement of the house or do something, construction project or do something like that. But I kind of wanted more. And again, at that point, I had probably the best job on the planet at the company I was in. I was managing the advanced development department for a company that made carbon monoxide detectors and smoke alarms and that kind of stuff. So
Right.
we'll get into the industrial side in a little bit, but this is where the music is coming kind of to an end and things are changing. So in an effort to, well, when I got hired at this company, they hired me to write software, of all things. I was getting tired of doing electronic hardware design. And so they hired me to do software. So I wrote software. I did the first project. It was a carbon monoxide detector. That's a story. That's a podcast in and of itself. But I felt like I could have done better. I could have done things more efficiently. Frankly, I didn't know what I was doing. Right. So I decided that, I'm going to take a class. Just go take a programming class. Right. That's all where my mindset was. Right. I'm just going to take a programming class. Okay. 5 years later, I had a master's degree in computer science. And by that time, I had changed jobs to a company where I was doing very sophisticated software design, a telecommunications infrastructure kind of company. So this is a company that makes large network switches and things like that. I was working on a thing that was a precursor to the cable modem.
Right.
Okay. So I was doing that kind of stuff. And this company started paying for me to pursue a Ph.D. because I was getting into security protocols. I was getting into cryptographic algorithms and doing that kind of stuff, which was a blast. I was having a really, really, really good time. And by that time, the music had really gone away, and my time hole vacuum was filled with. So now I'd wake up and go to work. I'd go to work, get home, and as my wife tells the story, because I've asked her, because there are parts of my memory that I'm not totally sure that I was there all the time, for the kids.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And she reminds me that, yes, you were there. All the concerts you carved out the time to make sure that happened. I was like, okay. So, sporting events, concerts, all that kind of stuff. So my days during my PhD studies were get up at 5:30 in the morning, go to work. I'd get back at about 6. We'd have dinner. I spend my time with the kids from the time, from dinner, pre-dinner, and going through till the time the kids went to bed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd go in the basement, which was about 8:30, 9 o'clock. And then I'd go in the basement and I'd work from 9 o'clock until 1 or 2 in the morning.
Right.
Okay. So this is the part that aggravates my graduate students, right? Because I would just simply tell them I did that for 10 years. Okay. So when you talk about not having time, to get things done, it's really kind of a misnomer. It's how you're managing time.
Yeah,
You, you know,
I definitely. So, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to
yeah,
I just wanted to point out a couple of things. So, I find it really interesting that you mentioned like your first initial idea was I'm just gonna take a programming class, right?
right.
And that's really interesting because that's sort of how I ended up here, because I was in a situation where I graduated from Purdue
Right.
and I was back home, and I was like, I did a bunch. I worked for like I did my first gig was being trained as a project coordinator for this industrial manufacturing company, right?
Hmm.
So I was working directly for the chief information officer,
Hmm.
and he was like, "All right, you're gonna be my man. Like, I'm gonna basically school you on how you manage the technology in a multinational um, global business, right?" And I
Hmm.
was like, okay, that sounds really interesting. So I worked there for like a year, but and then it was something was missing. I wasn't quite sure what it was. And then one of my friends was like, "Hey man, I'm starting like a travel business. Do you want to just come try that out?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds amazing." And it was all and it was all about cricket, right? So the entire thing was like bringing cricket teams to Sri Lanka and then traveling with them around the island and playing, like watching them play cricket, like arrange the matches, the tours. So it was like basically a big engineering project, but it was not just like it was just people instead of hardware, right?
Yeah.
And that was fun. And so after that, I started working for a big engineering company as as a marketing executive, because I had the engineering background and I also had the marketing chops because I worked on
Hmm.
that small company for a little while.
Hmm.
And how this started was that I was sitting in my office one day, like in my desk, and I was just like, you know, I'm missing the fun of technical stuff, like like doing like technical things. I'm just gonna take some online classes. Like I'm just gonna take I'm just gonna take
Right.
one online class and then see what happens. Right? That is literally
Right.
all I was thinking.
Right.
Yeah. So and now here now I'm in the Netherlands. I'm doing research. Like I'm TAing calculus courses, and I'm an undergraduate research assistant studying like complex systems. And I'm like, how did I end up here? I just wanted to
Right.
do one class.
Right.
you you
Right.
know? Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I was this telecommunications company was great because I've had two jobs in my career that I actually thought and actually wanted to retire from. Okay, two.
right. Yeah,
I was downsized in both of them, so it just didn't work out. And when I mean downsized, I mean it's just business. It's not you know. I think I told the computer architecture class that you were in
yep,
about
exactly.
about the second one. That I'm getting raises of 13-14% every year. I'm getting stock options and this and that, and I got 2 promotions in 5 years. That's not the track record of somebody who's not carrying their weight. But I was doing such cool stuff. It was way front end. So when kind of the .com bubble burst around around 2000, um, the target on my back got bigger and bigger because they need more of the engineers to actually engineer the products and do that kind of stuff. We were doing technical due diligence on companies to buy or partner with, and that kind of stuff. So, which was just a blast. It was I was basically doing research. Okay. I had just finished my master's, and when my master's was done, I was doing modeling and simulation work of fairly complex systems, right? Um, and when you have a person on your thesis committee at that time, this was around 2000. Yeah, this was about the year 2000. And they're asking, okay, how would you model the internet?
Yeah.
The internet, the
Yeah.
global
Right.
internet. It's like, wow, that's a pretty heady question. That's that's a really difficult one. And we were still in the days of AOL and dial-up modems and that kind of stuff. I mean, we hadn't, this whole thing of the internet, high-speed stuff, entertainment and news as fast as it's happening and all that kind of stuff. It's still fairly new. It hasn't been around that long. So, by the time I got done with my PhD, I was thinking about that problem. How do you monitor, how do you model things like large data latencies and things like that, errors that happen on the
Mhm.
internet and that kind of stuff. And so I ended up getting into parallel computational systems because they were confined and I could model things at a large level, but a smaller level than the World Wide Web, right? Because you can't, it's a difficult thing to simulate slash emulate, so you want to try to, simulations are only as good as the data that's put into them. Yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah,
There's
so
there's a great saying. Uh, uh, e- e- every model is wrong. Some models are useful.
right, exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So I developed kind of an emulator to emulate network traffic in ways that I could have large parallel programs that were actual programs that had start time and finish and that kind of stuff. I could have them run and then I could disturb them with my tool.
Hmm.
And we could measure that. We could measure the effects of the runtime, the runtime variation, of these large parallel programs. So anyway, long story short, that's kind of what I did on the PhD level, and I pursued that for a while at Purdue. Again, that last job that I had, I was downsized in 2002, and 2003 I got the gig at Purdue.
Right.
So, and I think I met you around 2013, 14,
Yeah. Yeah.
somewhere
Yeah.
in
Yep.
there.
Oh, I so
But
actually, I just wanted like I just something that came to mind, and I just wanted to ask you. So because you brought up the internet, right? Like,
yeah.
um, like I don't think about it as often as I should, but it does come to my mind sometimes. So so in AI, like I just make a sorry, it's just a random tangent, but this is gonna happen.
Yes.
Like, so in AI, one of the things that we like general like the general you know the, let's say coffee like the cooler the cooler talk is like
Hmm.
let's say AGI, right? Like an artificial general intelligence, right?
Hmm.
And some people claim it'll be next 20 years, 30 years, whatever, right? And I was just thinking about other technologies that people have sort of failed to predict. Like I I don't know enough about this, but were people talking about the internet like, hey, this is coming soon, or was it just something that sort of just showed up? Like I don't know. I wish I should know about I should know about more about this, but
Well, I, I I think I can help you with at least a little bit of that history. Because we were so involved in the early stages, there was a period of time when everybody who was accessing the internet was doing it via a telephone line.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There weren't cable modems, there weren't fiber, to the home, there weren't satellites, none of that stuff. So this company called AOL, America
Right.
Online,
Yeah.
right, it probably doesn't get the credit it deserves at literally engaging huge masses of people into this thing called the internet. Okay, so what was the actual utility? Well, businesses weren't using it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Entertainment wasn't using it yet. So what could we do with it? Well, we had this thing called email. And when DARPA did the first, internet, so to speak, that's all they were doing with it,
Right.
was sending, information between the research labs and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So by about 2000, by about the .com, bubble, what a lot of people don't know is that about half of the fiber optic capacity in the United States wasn't being used. It was
So what
there,
was
but
the what was the
nobody was using it.
what was the infrastructure in place for in the first place then? Like what was the fiber being?
Well,
What was
it was what they started doing is they started building fiber rings around cities.
okay.
So what started to happen was that businesses started using the internet as an advertising mechanism, right? We still hadn't
Mm-hmm.
gone quite into financial stuff yet. It was still evolving. Um,
Right.
this little company um, uh, called, I think it was Mosaic, Andreessen, who
Mm-hmm.
developed what eventually turned into Firefox,
Oh, right. Okay.
that browser. So now we started going from a text-based internet, which, by the way, all the PCs at that time, most of them were not graphic. Windows 95 had just started coming on board and
Right.
started penetrating. That was like the first graphical, of any kind of substance scale. I mean, Mac had their operating system years earlier, but they didn't have the scale. And so companies were putting intranets and doing network. There was a thing called Novell Network, and people were doing different kinds of network technologies, token rings, and things like that within companies to basically do file sharing. It's such an interesting circle.
Right.
We used to have services and applications on things called file servers within a company. So your desktop didn't really have anything on it.
Mm-hmm.
You had to go get like a little license to use Microsoft Word or or Excel or Lotus 123 or whatever the tool of the day you were using. And then we went the other way, so everything was on your desktop, and now we're going back to this thing we're calling a cloud,
Right.
right? So
Right.
so
Right.
we've gone full circle with this
Full
thing,
circle. Yeah.
and yeah, it's so amazing because as I reflect on it, it's been 20 years, um, and we've kind of done this full circle thing, and part of it's because the technology has evolved and the speeds are kind of there, and the security's mostly there. Um, I still think we're probably a generation or two behind. Computers and networks and internets and that kind of stuff. It's useful for people who are very technically literate,
Mm-hmm.
but for people who are only technically aware, it can be really dangerous.
Yeah, I get it.
Because a lot of folks just simply are naive and don't have any clue as to where they're going if they press this thing that came in a random email.
Right.
um,
So
which is
I
unfortunate.
find,
So
yeah, yeah. Sorry, no. So I just like I I've been thinking a lot about sort of, I've been thinking about how weird we are as human beings, right? Like, yeah, of course we're part of this ecosystem. We're animals like every other animal, but there's something about us
yes,
that's really weird, right? And I've been trying to, put my finger on what this weirdness is, and I'm trying to think of like all the all these different things that make us weird. And one of the things I think is that um our ability to cooperate and work with like a different agent is I would say like it seems to me like unbelievably unique in terms of, I mean, other animals have, team behavior, etc., but the degree to
yep,
which human beings coordinate is preposterous. Like the fact that you and I can have this conversation across oceans takes the cooperation of hundreds of thousands of people just doing their little part of the chain, right? Doing a little part of the
right.
job. And the fact that we have come up with things like abstract things like money, like that allow us to take our ability to cooperate to the next level, has made
Hmm.
it so much more powerful, right? And so I think of it. Think of the internet like one of these things where it's just like a step function increase in our ability to amplify the collective productivity of people. So
Right. And I think if we're not already there, we are arduously close to being at a technological place where humans in general can't handle it because we can information can go so fast
mhm.
and at such scale, it is simply overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And for most humans, we're still not there in terms of our own capacity to frankly parse out the noise. I mean, it's one of the
Exactly.
things that
I
I
was
think that I tried to explain to you guys back at Purdue was, when you look at the internet, you have to assume that at least half of what you see is garbage.
yep. So that
It's not useful.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and that's the trick is figuring all this out, right?
Absolutely. So, like, I mean, I was literally just about to mention this, and uh, from my estimation, it feels like to me there's a lot of data, but not much information. Like,
Right,
there's a lot of data, but actual knowledge that takes work. You have to sort of sieve that out, and a lot of people have trouble in their lives managing the signal to noise ratio, right? Like
right.
keeping themselves sane. So, for example, I've been off social media of all sorts except LinkedIn
Yep.
for about 2 years now,
Hmm.
and my life has been immeasurably improved. Like just because like so like it sort of forced me. So in the sense that the network I have around me of people, they also act like a really strong filter for information, right?
Yes.
And so instead of being trapped in the daily oscillations of like this happens, that happens, this happens, I am more able to tune into a longer term trend of what's happening instead of being
Yes.
distracted by the daily variation that happens in all these things, right?
Right. You have
So
figured out a good way to slow things down a little bit,
yeah, yeah,
right?
to my primate brains can
Right.
manage.
Well, I think it's extremely important for all of us to kind of do that, to slow things down. You've got everybody has they're quote unquote reliable sources.
Yeah.
Wherever they get information,
Right.
there's what they consider their most reliable sources. And then sometimes it sort of helps to um, once in a while go investigate what you think is an unreliable source, if for no better reason just to verify that it's an unreliable source.
I agree. Like
Right.
I think like uh this like I've been, I mean, I've been fascinated with this the idea of information, because I've been trying to figure out what exactly it is that we're doing here, right? Like in terms of just human beings, right? What it is that we're doing here,
Right.
and like uh, uh, I mean, I toyed with the idea that like then the I've been toying with the idea a lot, the fact that like the idea that we are just a anyway, I'm not gonna get into the tangent right now. We'll get there on this later.
Oh, you go
But
right ahead. Yep.
all right, okay, fine. So um because I'm studying neuroscience as well, and I'm studying
Yes.
like a lot of uh AI um stuff that's the point of view is from an information processing point of view, right? That the brain is an information processor that it deals with inputs and outputs in the very in the reason in the same way a computer does. Part of me thinks that's just sort of like us hoping that it's true so that we can put it on, make it reality on a computer. Like it's like a wish, like it's like a wish that we hope this is the right idea so that we can implement it in a machine and then finally have our dream of this AI thing that you want to get to, right? I'm not so convinced personally. But what the hell do I know? I'm like I don't know anything, right? But I was also thinking like I've been so part of the thinking about this idea of, okay, fine, if our brain's an information processor, right? Let's like take that idea to the limit. And what if the entire universe is just a processor of information? Like all it does is process information. Like like w- it's being run on some unknown substrate that we have no idea. Like we are just inside this thing, like, and we're doing something, we're processing information, we're doing something, moving towards some optimization like some optimal point that we have no idea about, right? And so like it's weird, like this whole experience is I find to be quite a strange phenomenon. And considering how much you've worked with information, and
Right.
like man, where do I start? So I started reading a book on information theory, just to sort of like try to, because I needed a way to understand how to quantify this, right? Like how, like what is the thought, what are the thought processes that we use to quantify information, right? And it looks like Shannon's work is
Yeah.
the go-to, right? It's like this is how we
Right.
quantify it, this is how we measure it, this is how we measure how good a signal is, etc., etc., right? And
Correct.
I read that book, and I know less now than I read than when I started. So like, so- sorry, that was a strange rant, but
Right.
that was a
Right.
strange rant.
No, and that's, I think beauty of that's the beauty of more education is the mo- the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know.
Yeah,
And just coming to grips with that you really don't know. I mean, my PhD advisor, when I defended my dissertation, when I was done, she came out and she said, "That wasn't your best work. I'd seen you at conferences before and you just knocked it out of the park and you did fine,
hmm,
but so she just kind of asked, she said, is there something going on? And I said, to be perfectly honest, I've gone through this entire process and I feel like I've done nothing.
right.
And she said, congratulations, you're done. That's exactly the way you're supposed to feel.
Yeah,
If you
yeah,
feel like you've accomplished something, you probably don't understand the problem,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because the problem, if you're going to tackle something hard, tackle something hard. Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
And the problems that you're talking about are definitely really hard,
Yeah.
which is why when you sent me the link for the university you're studying at now, I was like, wow, what a brilliant idea to combine artificial intelligence and psychology and neuroscience
Right.
and
Yeah, it's been
ethics
amazing.
and all of those things. I was like, wow, how come I didn't think of that? That's brilliant. I mean, that's the future. You know, the future isn't necessarily. I mean, I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, but not necessarily physics,
Mhm.
where you know gravity's been around a long time. We kind of know how that works, but there are things that we're trying to understand that are way beyond my comprehension. The origins of everything and all that kind of stuff, and um, which I think is cool. But that's a pretty, I guess, small field. There's not a lot of people doing that.
Right.
That kind of work. Whereas the things that are affecting the planet, you go towards this notion of communication. Human beings communicating.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that I was studying a little bit in my copious free time back then, around 2013, 2014, was just trying to get an understanding of why do humans communicate? Why?
Right.
Um, and there aren't many reasons why humans communicate.
Mhm.
You,
So
you, you know,
it's funny. Okay, fine. I'll field a hypothesis that I have for why we communicate. Uh, so I so I think we communicate out of a sheer necessity, in the sense that let's so e- so we inhabit this world reality, right? There are strong correlations between what you experience and what I experience. Like, we
mhm,
experience gravity the same way, we
right,
experience light the same way. The laws of physics, for the most part, seem pretty uniform, right? Like, in the sense that we all experience them pretty much the same way. But despite that, there's something so unique about each individual person's experience that it's actually strange that it should be the case, but it is. Like, you and I can sit it at the same exact it's the same exact concert, listen to the same exact song, and have two completely different experiences, right?
oh, correct. That's a big thing in the field of criminology.
Right.
People that see and experience a crime,
Hmm.
the things that they miss
Right.
are
Exactly.
incredible.
Yeah, so I was
It's
thinking about it, just the sheer need to not feel so lonely, like, just to be able to just to somehow get this other being into my state of mind. The only tool we have is communication, right? Until we build some sort of neural link. Uh, like, we
right,
have, like, out of sheer necessity, just be like, I know you think you see what you see, but I need to tell you what I'm seeing. Like, this is something you need to understand, right?
right. Well,
And
you're hitting on um, the notion of um, giving information, seeking information. Um, there's the communication to convey emotion,
mhm.
right? And then the biggie, right, which is we communicate to persuade.
Right.
So
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's that exchange of information, and then you go to the next level of, okay, why are we exchanging information? Is it for the sake of exchanging information, or is it for the sake of trying to persuade that the information that I'm conveying to you is somehow correct or truth?
I mean, there's
or
value in that, right? There's real value in
yeah,
that because like if you and I if you and I are in a society in a group, like we'd want to know whose information is better, right? Wouldn't we want to know
and
like
better is
what?
a relative term,
Well,
right?
yeah, true. But like
It goes back to sources.
but
Yeah.
like if you're the thing is if we're the information is relative, isn't it relative only so far as we don't have a goal? Like once we have a goal together that you want to accomplish, doesn't that sort of sort the information in sort of okay, this is more useful than this information than the next information? Like once we have a
Well,
target.
and that's where I think that's where the questions that you asked me to ponder,
Hmm.
right? And the link that I shared with you earlier
Yep.
on top 10 challenges
Yeah. Number one is
is,
is amazing.
and so um, when you when I look at that, I can look at I can look at challenges 2 through 10.
Yo, sorry,
Okay.
just for everyone who's listening, like this is a list of
Yeah, this
global,
is Global Topia.
yeah,
It's
global
a it's
topia.
a it's a thing that I referenced probably a decade ago, and
Hmm.
really not much has changed.
Right.
The top 10 challenges facing humanity,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of them are the things that you would you know most people would concur with, disease and human suffering, education, democracy and human rights, population, poverty,
Hmm.
food and water, environment, energy. I would say 2 through 10, I can completely take off the table, because if we can get the first one,
Right. Misinformation.
misinformation, denial, and inertia,
Yep.
if we can get at, if the planet can get its hands around that,
Hmm.
all of the rest of those things will happen. We will make great strides towards solving the energy problem. We will make great strides towards solving the food problem.
So
The
like I mean this is actually super interesting that you like just I mean I'll just give like just as a segue into how information can solve like the energy problem, right? So if you think about Bitcoin, right?
Mhm,
Um, now all of a sudden like these remote places in parts of the world where all they had was sunlight, like literally, right? They had no infrastructure, they had no
mhm,
government, they have is sunlight. They can now sell their energy without wires, right? So they can set up some solar panels and just start mining
mhm,
coins, right? And they are effective. So now people are like, okay, hey, this country, like say for example, let's take I don't know some sunny place like Sri Lanka is like, man, sunny place, land is super cheap, labor is super cheap. I'm just gonna go over there and build a massive Bitcoin farming like solar rig, and all of a sudden this piece of land that had no worth at all is unbelievably valuable just because it can generate this abstract like information currency, which is really something super interesting, right?
mhm.
That levels the playing field like to a certain degree. I mean, obviously, it needs to be scaled, but like
Right.
those things are really like this information thing. So okay, do you think it's just like a growing pains period? Do you think like we've sort of gotten the tools to gather all this information? We just haven't gotten around to learning how to make good use of it yet? Do you think it'll pass, or is something that needs to be addressed like
Um,
seriously?
well, I think the tools will continue to evolve, um, but no, and I think some of the things that what you're studying now can help with is some of the processing of all of that information in order to try to make sense out of it.
Hmm.
It's, and I think we have to go after it without preconceived notions of what the answer is.
Right. That's really hard. Right. Because getting
Right?
hard.
That's the
Yeah.
hard part. I
Yeah,
mean,
indeed.
everybody wants to know, well, okay, what's the outcome going to be? Well, we don't know.
Hmm.
We honestly don't know. I mean, um, you and I have communicated on the book *Sapiens*.
Right. Yeah, it's right.
That humans have been pretty lousy to each other since we've been on the planet. I mean, there's evidence, there's archaeological evidence of that.
Right.
So and yet we still do the same things. We still treat ourselves, frankly, pretty poorly,
Hmm.
and a lot of that is a result of communication,
Hmm.
whether it's story, um, whether it's evolved into misinformation or the concept of my information is better than your information, and therefore that makes you a subhuman being.
Right.
And that's the part that's really scary. That's the
Right.
part that scares me in terms of the future. The hope is how do we change that? And this is a generational kind of thing. It's probably many generations to see this to fruition, because today one group or one culture's view of what an optimum human condition is might be very different from another culture's view of what an optimum human condition might be.
Hmm.
And too often we make comparisons, like um, like the countries of the so-called West. They've got it so great and all that kind of stuff, and everybody else has got it so bad. Where sometimes when you just go talk to some of these other places, it's like the cultures are very content in the life that they're spending on the planet. And they have been there's certain tribes still in the Amazon River, basin that, if they have been found, they're very, very private, but they continue to communicate and live and go through generations and all that kind of stuff in what we might consider a very primitive way. But what's necessarily wrong with that?
So,
They're surviving.
I mean, this is something that hits pretty close to home because right now, Sri Lanka is going through probably its worst economic crisis since it got independence, and that's, I mean, like COVID totally flattened us, right?
Yes.
And our number one, our primary income, Sri Lanka's primary income was tourism, right?
Yes.
And once that, I mean, that was basically it.
Yep.
Um, so and I mean that's but the thing is we can't lay the blame at the feet of COVID, to be completely honest, right? I mean, like, it's a problem,
Correct.
but it didn't, like, the reason it like it was a catastrophe, it was a problem, but the reason it became a disaster is all on us, right? Like, um I mean, our institutions and our systems of, how we want to make things work, like, they were none of those things were in place to handle something like this, right? And to your point about, like, the optimal human condition, that's the, you know I don't know, like, it's so,
Right.
like, like, because I being some from some, like, the height of my accomplishments should have been shoveling rocks in some ditch somewhere, because, if I was born literally, like, the next door to my next door neighbor instead of my parents, right? That might have been my future, because that's most Sri Lankans. So they work for, like, they work for the government. They speak Sinhalese, which is just this one little language that no one else in the world speaks, right? And
Hmm.
then you look at me, and when I tell people I'm Sri Lankan, I have to always be like, just to be clear, this is an anomaly. Like, I'm not most Sri Lankans, right?
Right.
And while I appreciate all the benefits I gained from the things like America has accomplished, for example, or the Netherlands, right? These
Yes.
advanced economies,
Yes.
and I don't know. Like it's like, what do you want with your life, right? That's the question. Like, what do you want?
Yes.
What do you want to do? You know?
Yes. What is I look at the, obviously with the things that have gone on within the United States over the last 4 or 5 years. It's actually been much longer than that, but I'll just pick on the last 4 or 5 years. I've taken the opportunity to read the U.S. Constitution several times and
Mhm.
and just take in, the words and the Declaration of Independence and that kind of stuff. And you know, I think the writers of those documents, when they coined the phrase, the right of every human to pursue happiness. They didn't say guarantee happiness.
Yeah,
They
pursue
said
it.
you have the right to pursue happiness,
Yeah,
and they didn't define what happiness was.
yeah,
Right? It's to your point. It's an extremely individual kind of thing,
yeah.
and so there's it's just this weird place that we seem to
So
be in.
so like
Um,
I so given that this problem is really hard, I've been thinking about, so that's why I sort of asked you, right? Like the world you want to like run towards and the things you want to run away from, right?
right.
And so I, because over the past say 2 years or so, I've been reading about trying to get myself um educated about the history of all the horrendous things that have happened, right? Like
Yes.
the
Yes.
the I mean, from great horrific things like the Holocaust to like the Mao's Great Famine, all those
Right.
big things to like
Right.
little horrific tragedies. Um, this is one amazing book called the uh, Ordinary Men, right? And it documents the transition of ordinary policemen who were well adults and who were adults and doing their job before the Nazis ever came into power, right?
Right.
And how they went from being normal policemen to shooting naked pregnant women in the back of the head in fields,
Right.
right? And then you reach out to the death and you're like, wait a minute, that person's a human being, right?
Right.
I'm a human being, right? So like, am I capable of that? Like
Right.
that's
Right.
horrifying, right? That'll keep you
Right.
up at night.
Right. Right. Can you hit the pause button
Yeah, for sure.
for about a minute? Give
Yeah,
me
of course.
about a minute or
Take
so.
as long as you need. Yeah.
Take
Right.
a
All right. So we're back. Okay. So
Okay.
um, I don't know where I was going with that, but the this idea of the optimal human condition, right? Like where should we like move towards? So when when I'm reading books like that, I'm like, okay, well, definitely don't want to go there, right? Like I don't even want to. Like the thing is, I'm afraid. Like thing is, I don't know what I would do if I was put in that situation, right? So like
Correct.
when someone sees a picture of, let's say, from the Holocaust or the Soviet Union, and they see like one of the like one of the like a SS officer, like putting a gun down someone's throat, or like someone some soldier in Soviet Union or Pol Pot's Cambodia, whatever. It's easy for us to imagine that we're the victim in this picture, but isn't it also equally likely that we could be the guy holding the gun? Like, isn't that part of what makes us human beings?
Correct.
So,
Correct. That's the hard part. It's we like to think we can put ourselves in a situation and how we would handle it, but
Hmm.
you don't know until you're in it.
Absolutely. So, this is a great segue, and I wanted this is something I wrote down. I want to ask you about. Okay, so do you remember the Boeing 737 Max uh,
Yes.
catastrophe? Right. Right. Okay. So we were talking about this in our ethics class about 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 this, right? And we were we were trying to figure out like how who was responsible for this, right? And and we had this image, right? Like from the pilots. So with the pilots, the engineers, the management, and then the CEOs, like the spectrum, right? So far on the far left was the passengers and the pilots, then the engineers, then the CEOs, whatever, right? And my first reaction was like, I saw the engineers up there, and I was like, and then I heard about the engineering decisions that were made, like like one sensor working on one critically important um, feature, and my initial reaction was like, no good engineer would be okay with this, right? And then my next reaction was like, there's no way someone from Purdue was on this team, right? like, like there was. I want to believe that in my heart,
Right.
but
Right.
I don't know how true that is. But like, I was just like, I was thinking. So all ethics aside, isn't that so? There's it's just a purely engineering decision. It's like you don't do that, right? Like if you have a mission critical thing, and first of all, sensors are stochastic and on the best of days, right? And
Right.
and like you have this one thing that's supposed to control how the angle of the plane, and then you have one sensor with no backups or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
what I want to ask you is like is my initial reaction was like, if you were an engineer in the situation, you should have you shouldn't have let that happen. You should be like, no, this is not good engineering, I'm out, right? Again,
Right.
it's easy for me to say because I'm not in that position, right? Like I
Okay.
don't.
Well, then I will give you an example.
Yeah.
I will give you an example. In my early days as an engineer, I was designing smoke detectors, residential smoke alarms.
Right.
Okay. So we would sell anywhere from 5 to maybe 10 million of these things every year.
Hmm.
These are a lot of
A lot of,
smoke
yeah.
alarms in a lot of homes,
Yeah. Right.
right? Whose purpose is only one: to detect a fire and sound an alarm in case of fire,
Hmm.
right? Well, I was designing what would turn out to be the first mass-produced um, AC smoke detector with a DC backup. So it was connected to the house wiring,
Right.
but it had a battery backup.
Right.
Why we didn't think about it sooner, I'll never know. And this was in 1985 or 86. It
Hmm.
was a long time ago. But I was going through the design, and if you're familiar with how smoke alarms work, when DC smoke alarms, when the battery gets low, about once a minute it will chirp.
Yep.
It will
I know
just make
what
a
that sounds.
chirping sound.
Yeah.
It's annoying,
Yeah.
right? But it's a little chirping sound, and it's what it's telling you is it's telling you that the battery is dying,
Hmm.
and actually what it's telling you is that it's at a place where it's unlikely that it will support 85 decibels for 5 minutes or something like that. But it's
Right.
basically telling you the battery's dying. Um, Today they've gotten better that actually will tell you not only that the battery's dying, but there's also a problem with the sensor.
Mm.
Okay,
Right.
which is a natural evolutionary step. Well, during this design process, again, it was the first of its kind. I designed it such that if the battery was dying or the battery wasn't there, it would chirp.
Hmm.
Okay. And it was almost by accident that it turned out that way. I was laying out the circuit and all that kind of stuff, and then I had the battery out, but it was still connected to AC, and it was chirping. I was like, oh, that's really a good thing, because if there's no battery in it, you want there to be a battery, because the whole point of an AC smoke detector with a DC backup is if it's an electrical fire and you lose power in the house, you
Right.
still have an operating smoke alarm,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Common sense.
Makes sense.
Well, the marketing folks came back eventually to me. They went to my boss, and he was skeptical, but he was kind of hemming and hawing. So the marketing folks came back to me, and they kind of said, "We want you to change the design so that if the battery's low, it will chirp, but if the battery's not there, it won't." And I said, "Well, why do you want to do that?" And they said, "Well, one of the one of the large markets for these particular smoke alarms was subsidized housing units in cities. And the tenants in the subsidized housing would steal the batteries, okay, to use them
Whatever
in
they
boom
need.
boxes and things like
Yeah.
that. These are 9-volt batteries. So, I went home, thought about it, went back the next day, and basically, I told my boss, I told the marketing guys, I said, I'm not going to change the design. I said, if you want, you can go complain to the owner of the company. I'm not going to resign. You're going to have to fire me.
Right.
But I'm sticking to my guns on this. It makes no sense. From an engineering point of view, it makes no sense to design the unit in this way. They took a week or so to think about it, and they eventually backed down. But so to your point, that kind of a scenario actually happened to me. And it was fairly early in my career. I don't know, I was,
So what made you? What gave you? Like, what made you stand your ground? Like, what was it? What, like, is it just?
well,
Mm.
it was purely a technical argument that was related to saving lives,
Right.
right? If the battery isn't there, and the cause of the fire is electrical and it knocks out the AC, the smoke alarm is now not going to function at all. So it's not going to warn the inhabitants that there's a fire.
Right.
So I just found that because there was a technical solution, I found that morally wrong.
Right. Right.
It just wasn't, it wasn't the right, position to take. Um, and eventually I must have been persuasive enough
Right.
with my logic. I had to communicate, to people what my position was, and why it made the most sense. Um, yeah, it kind of went against the purpose for having that particular kind of unit in the first place.
Right. So, like, so in class, I made the argument that, like, so, like, let's imagine these guys who are working on this, like, because people are, they were like, they were like saying, oh, it's all the CEO's fault and whatever, right? Which is fairly easy to do. But I was
Yeah,
saying, like, okay, let's just consider the situation. These engineers are working for Boeing, right?
yep,
Which means they're good at their job, right? Which
yep,
means, like, they're getting paid because they're getting paid good money because
mhm,
they probably all went to they all probably went to good schools. They have great
yep,
degrees.
yep.
W- What is the risk of saying, you know what, I quit? Like, are you not going to be able to find a job? Like, what's the downside there? Like, I don't, like, I mean, sure, like, okay, fine, maybe they have a house and kids and, like, like people have problems. I understand that, right?
Yeah.
But at one point, like for me, in one sense, it was just like that's just a bad engineering move. And if you consider yourself a good engineer, you just wouldn't do that, right? Like it's just like would compare.
Yeah. I mean, you've got the, yeah, number one, there's always a trade-off. Anything you're designing for both function and cost.
Right.
So you're trying to design the highest level of functionality, typically for, if not the lowest cost, a very advantageous cost.
Right.
Um, so normally there's, and we may not know, we may never know that maybe an engineer did quit.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, exactly. That's true. That's true. Yeah, you're right.
Maybe someone did quit,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
they just left. They said, "No, this is
This is
this is
not. Yeah.
absolutely wrong. I'm gone."
Right.
And whether it was in the group or at a management level higher, they signed off on it and let it go.
Right.
Um, so it's tough to know for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I,
Um,
I, I try not I'm not trying to judge these people. I'm just trying to get the best information I can because I am horrified. I'm terrified I'll be in that position someday. And I just hope I have the strength and the support in my life for me to say, you know what, this is not worth it. Right? Like that's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of that situation when I have to put my money where my mouth is, right? And
um, yeah, it always, well, I won't, always is too strong. Um, it is often the case that some of the scariest moments are where you kind of have to put your money where your mouth is. You know,
like especially in the kind of stuff that I'm working on, right? Like so,
right?
and it's like, do I want? m- I mean, people would probably like if people, let's say people will probably pay me good money to help them build ever more advanced surveillance systems to detect faces, identify like automatically detect criminals, like, and they're gonna be like, we'll pay you whatever you want, right? Just do this thing, right? And I hope I'm the kind of person. I don't know. That's the thing, right? I've never been tested at that level, so it's like I'm just like trying to trying to think about it.
Well, I mean, that's why I'm, frankly, so excited and actually so very proud of you for the combination of things that you're studying. Right? You're obtaining a great um, a great technological education, but with a very complementary moral compass. And there aren't many programs on the planet that actually do that.
you know,
That actually that's part of the program's design, is to help you have all of those tools. So when it is time, because the way I was trained as an engineer, there, yeah, I could have chosen a philosophy class, or a psychology class or an ethics class, but I wasn't guided there.
mhm.
And I can tell you that I think it would have been helpful.
And like,
Um,
I appreciate you saying that, but also like I want to give credit where it's due, like to Purdue, right? I always tell people that I am unbelievably lucky that I went to school there because when one thing I got from there was this sort of does it work well attitude, right? Like whenever we were building something, it's like okay, that's cool, but like I got this sense that whatever you do a good job of it, right?
right.
I mean, and that varies. I mean, obviously that what that means is different to everybody, right? So, but for me, what that meant was like, okay, if I'm doing this thing, do it like go all in, do it really well, right? And just stick to the principles so that even though it could be a morally difficult question, maybe just sticking to the first principles will save you. Like, hey, as a good engineer, I'm not gonna build a system that only has one sensor. Sorry, no, that's not like I don't have a moral stance. I'm just saying this is bad engineering, right?
Well, where you go with that is, and it was a thing that I learned that the automotive industry does a lot of. I sort of dreaded these times, but they call it an FMEA, failure modes and effects analysis.
Right.
That's what the A stands for. So, as part of the process, you're you're asking exactly that question, right? Basically, what's going to happen if this particular sensor fails?
Hmm.
And what's going to happen if it fails this way? Or what's going to happen if it fails that way? Um, and so, as part of that kind of a process, and we pretty much did that with almost every system, that I've ever dealt with. I worked in automotive, I worked in medical imaging, I worked in the consumer stuff. So we'd always be asking those questions.
Hmm.
So what happens if this thing fails? And sometimes we'd actually make stuff fail,
Right.
um, and go, oh, that's okay, that's not good. Then you start looking, okay, what's the probability of this thing failing? Um, if it's something that's somewhat complex, like a sensor, yeah, the probability of it failing is probably higher than some passive component.
Right.
So yeah, so those are questions that are are generally a common part of the process.
Hmm.
Um,
Do, do you also think?
and then you get into the economic and
Yeah,
time
yeah.
constraints of,
So,
of
so,
the project as well.
so
So
do you also like think about sort of how you evaluate what you're doing is sort of is it driven by the compass that's set for you, right? For example, if the idea of this, like if the only metric is profit, I mean,
mhm,
then that sort of it changes the decisions you make. It's like it sort of shapes the reality you see about the thing you're trying to do, right? Like I'm not
that's
saying profit is bad. Like I mean, like it's been an incredibly useful tool. I mean, this system of letting people build stuff and then getting profit for their hard work is totally, I understand that, right?
right.
But so like the idea of making the profit versus, let's say, if Boeing's core principle was taking people from A to B safely, right? That
Hmm.
was our primary objective. And I think even if a company starts at that picture, over time, especially when you get so big like Boeing, it gets diluted, right? And you sort of forget where you came from. And like I I mean, I'll give you an example. So when I was a marketing executive at this engineering company, this customer came in one day, and my entire sales team was out. So I was like, I'll talk to him. It's fine. Um, and then I sat there, and this guy came in completely convinced that our product was already exactly what he needed. Right. So basically, he came in telling me what needs to happen, like how I want it built, and I listened to him for like an hour. And in that moment, I was just like this is like easily I don't know, like like percentage point revenue, right? So it's like it matters. And I was like, um, you know what, man? I appreciate you coming down here, but like I don't think what we will do for you is gonna solve your problem, right? Because like my fundamental idea of what the company was doing was solving these people's problems, right? Like,
Hmm.
and in my mind, I was like, okay, look, I did the calculation. I was like, look, even if we do an amazing job on this project, this guy will never be happy because we
Hmm.
will never solve his problem. Like the thing we are making is not capable of solving the problem that he has. So
Right.
I spent another hour showing him what the actual problem he had was, not what he thought the problem was. And then he was like, "Oh yeah, I see it now. This would never work." And I was like, "Yeah, this would never work to solve the problem that you have." And then I mean, this is like, like 5 6 years ago. I was fresh out of Purdue, and then he was so impressed. He was like, "Hey, if you ever leave this place, you need to come work for me." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, thanks." But the main thing for me was like, I built so much goodwill with this guy,
Hmm.
right? Like, he recommended us to people whose problems that we could actually solve,
Right.
right? And that was more valuable to me, and it has been more valuable to the company in the long run than trying to squeeze the profit out of this one guy and then potentially hamstringing 10 years worth of business down the road,
Right.
right? So,
Right.
like, how you perceive what your company is doing, I think, really changes the the set of options you have available to you.
Right. Right. That's there. That's true. Um,
So what happens in these big companies? My question is, like, what happens in these big companies that makes it difficult for, like, it seems like they start off with something that they want to do, and then they get caught up in the uh, quarterly reports and the share the share dividends, and they sort of seem to lose track of what they were doing there in the first place. Is that your sense, or?
that's very true. They get large, and then there's generally a certain amount of bureaucracy that has to come into play in order to sustain the largeness.
Hmm.
And so now you're getting into processes and layers of human communication and isolation. Departments don't know what the other department's doing,
Right.
that kind of stuff. um, and I think that's just kind of a natural thing. I mean, corporations have that problem, governments have that problem. It's the
Hmm.
same, it's basically the same problem, right? As things get bigger and bigger and bigger, yes, they are serving a larger and larger and larger scale. That's true. Um, and hence, typically design cycles, product release cycles slow down.
Hmm.
Um, it, it was a thing back in the early 90s that in the automotive industry, it was at least 5 years before car companies would even consider, you know, major,
Revamps.
changes.
Yeah.
And now that's been shrunk, I think because they had to. They just had to get more agile. So, how they did that, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe they just broke things down into smaller groups, that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, it's a real issue, I guess, a challenge.
Hmm. So, like, I was thinking about it from like an information dynamic perspective, right? It just seems like as you get larger, your build like your the movement of information and new information within the system, there's something like it gets more difficult. Things don't
Mhm.
get to where they need to get. People don't know what they need to know, and the decision making becomes far removed from the actual point where it gets implemented.
Yes, language and interpretation of language is everything.
Hmm.
It's it's what is said or written, how it's written. Um, some of the most difficult challenges I've ever experienced as an engineer, frankly, was writing system specifications.
Right.
How is this thing supposed to operate? How is it supposed to behave? For how long? But all of those kinds of things, and you start to get into these thing, again, you're playing trade-offs and this kind of stuff because you're trying to specify how something is supposed to be done while giving some amount of flexibility to those who have to try to implement it, right? Because there's always multiple solutions to a problem generally,
Right.
right? So you start using words like shall.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, that's a rock solid thing. You shall do this.
Yeah.
And then you get into the fuzzy areas, may and should. It should do this.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to.
Right.
You may do that,
Right.
but you may not. But the words shall and must are non-negotiable,
Right.
right? So until you've done it, and there's a reason why I never believed it until I was in it, right? That a good systems engineer, typically at that last company that I worked for, the telecommunications company, it was only the guys with about 20 years of experience that got those jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And until I had to do it, then I understood why.
Right.
Because it is that hard. Especially in something that's quite complex.
Right. So I'll ask a simple question. How hard is it to get stuff to work? It's pretty hard, right?
Let's put it this way. It's typically easy to get something to work.
Yeah.
Well, but make it work tomorrow.
Right.
And the next day.
Yeah.
And the next day. And
Yep.
the next day. And for possibly years, or possibly 5 years, or possibly 10 years.
Right.
That it's a little trickier to do that kind of thing. Now
Yeah,
you're getting into the time that a designer spends researching materials and all that kind of stuff, the parts that
yeah.
go into the thing.
I mean, like the fact that every time I open my MacBook, like my computer, every time I turn it on, I'm pretty much certain, like close to certain, it'll work. Like it'll turn on, right?
Yep.
Like for years, it'll do that. And it's been doing that for day after day after day for years, right?
Correct.
And the amount of like how you would build that level of how you constrain the randomness in this world to the point where that's possible is, I mean, that's a miracle as far as I'm concerned.
It is quite remarkable. It is quite remarkable. The laptop I'm talking to you on right now is a MacBook Pro 2014. It cannot be upgraded to
Right.
the Monterey operating system, so I'm done at whatever the last one was, Big Sur, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm getting a warning that the battery needs to be replaced.
Yeah.
But 2014,
Yeah,
it's 8 years old.
It's amazing.
It is 8 years old, and so yes, I will be retiring this unit probably within the next 12 months. But like you say, every day it turns on.
I find our ability to do that that's it just it really, it's like a awe-inspiring thing for me to think about, the fact that given how chaotic, how much chaos, like the universe and nature is indifferent to our suffering as far as I'm concerned, right?
Yes.
Right. And
Yes.
but we have somehow been able to constrain things, like build a house that stands, there's electricity in the outlets, there's water flowing in the taps
Right.
regularly, like it works.
Right. Right.
And it's not complete chaos all the time. Just the fact that we can manage that, like this hairless apes, walking on 2 feet, that's pretty
Right. Well,
miraculous.
going back to your Boeing question, right? Look at all the planes that Boeing has made that are 30, 35 years old, and they
Yeah,
still
totally
fly
fine.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, that's what amazes me
Right,
is
exactly,
those
exactly.
things are, they're in the weather and all kinds of different weather conditions and all that kind of stuff and stress conditions, takeoff and landing.
Uh,
It's just amazing.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's nothing short of miraculous, and like
yeah.
and like the work you've done, it's just like so I just hope I can, like I just want to be useful at this point. I'm not concerned about changing the world. I just want to be a useful human being and not leave the place worse than when I found it. Like that's all I'm like. Honestly, honestly, if I manage to like disappear when I die, and it was not, it was as if like it was just like a footprint in like the sand on a beach, and I'm just gone, I'd be happy with that. What I don't want is like to have left a lasting detrimental effect that just that's just a catastrophe for everyone that comes after me. If I'm not a part of that, I'll be good. I'm not interested in saving the world. I just want to be like have a just do a good job. you
Right.
know
Right. Well,
like
I mean, if you can, this is what I'm trying to do every day, and I don't succeed every day, but I try, is just to be the best version of me, yeah, every day.
absolutely,
I
absolutely.
can retain my criticality from the education that I've been blessed to be able to get, and but not become judgmental.
Right.
Yeah, it's one thing to be critical, and it's a good thing to be critical,
Hmm.
especially if you've done your homework, you've done your research, and that kind of thing. But um, just you try to stay away from the judgment side of things. That's where we sort of get ourselves into lots of trouble these days, I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely. I agree. All right, Professor, you've given me almost 2 hours of your time. This has been amazing. So I'm not gonna I'm not gonna impose upon you any longer. But I want to ask you. So a world that you think is worth running like hell towards. What do you think that world looks like?
Well, I mean, that world, we've got to solve that number one global challenge.
Yeah, I
We've
agree.
we've got to get that misinformation, denial, you know, inertia part, dealt with, and how we do that. I mean, um, yeah, I don't know. Just I guess spreading that word.
Hmm.
Um, it's not about trying to be ultra persuasive as much as it is to, I don't know, um, get get people to open their minds.
And talk to
Um,
each other, I guess, like more than
just
anything else.
yeah, be an open-minded, world. Um, that's the world that I want to run to. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
that's what I try to impart on my kids. Is just try to be open-minded and um, yeah, that sort of thing. So yeah, yeah, I mean that's, yeah, all the other things I think will fall into place.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, human behavior is already changing in places where it needs to. Um, yeah, U.S. is buying more EVs. Europe has always had a decent, um, not only philosophy but implementation. There's many more bicycles and
Hmm.
that sort of thing in places in Europe, but the geography lends itself nicely to that.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas in the U.S. we're typically just spread out more. Um, yeah, some of the other problems, food and I've seen enough studies that there's a general belief that population is going to level itself out on the
Yeah.
planet. It may,
Yeah. Yeah.
may
Yeah.
already be starting to.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, so,
I mean, the food.
and
I mean, I can tell you, the food problem is just a logistics problem at this point.
yes, oh, absolutely. I mean, my wife and I were having this conversation the other night of, gee, at least in the U.S., all we got to do is we can literally flip a switch and turn all the farmers on in the U.S. and basically feed the planet.
Hmm. I
Yeah,
mean,
you know,
Sri Lanka is just, I mean, it's just doing this to itself. Like we are just in a catastrophe, you know. But like, in terms of, oh man, I had a thought that I was wanted to say, but yeah, sorry, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. But
well, it's okay.
um, uh, I just wanted to add, like, when I was growing up, I what there's an interesting phenomenon because I watched at least American TV shows, American movies. I read American authors. I read, like I read these books, but everything came to me a little late, because I'm in a little island in Sri Lanka, right? So
Yeah,
I'm watching TV shows that are 10 years old, or like, 7 years old, or like reading books that are decades old. So when I moved to America, the image of America I had in my head was no longer there. It was kind of hard for me to find that place. I was like, wait, where is this? Like, where is that place? Right?
mhm,
But I still believe, and I still want America to be that uh, force that, for good in the world. Like, not your own idea of what good is, but just like
right,
set an example, like not impose your will all over the world, like like
right.
like like seems to be the modus operandi lately. But just like like, even if this is super naive, I know this is gonna sound naive as hell, but like I still believe in that, that um like figure your shit out for yourself, like pick yourself up by the bootstraps, and like honesty and no nonsense truth and communication and just getting shit to work, pardon my
Yeah,
French, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah. Well,
I still think that there's like we need that force in the world, and I just hope America
right,
can find that again.
right. There's a lot to unwind over basically the last 120 years.
Hmm.
You know, there were two quote unquote world wars that frankly scared enough of the planet to where you know there's there were a lot of agreements that were made by you know 6 or 7 presidents ago
Hmm.
that the people today are still dealing with.
Right.
um, it's like, how do you unwind a lot of that stuff? And the more recent events have, I think, accelerated the notion, at least some of the things I'm reading and seeing. Um, the Germans and the Poles are starting to realize that, hey, we've probably World War II's over. It's been over for a while. We have to stop kind of hiding from that
Hmm.
and like you say, pulling up from your bootstraps. And America will always have those countries' backs,
Hmm.
but at the same time, um, and this goes back several presidents ago, we committed to, saying, yeah, we're going to have your back, but the only way for us to help you is to put military bases here and this and that and that kind of stuff. So now you've got some very interesting questions about what happens next. What does a lot of the quote foreign policy look like? Um, if you're if you're some of these countries, I was at a place in 2016, the Air Force War College,
Hmm.
um, which is down in Montgomery, Alabama. And a lot of the conversation, this was in 2016, was about America's foreign policy and the perspectives of, and again, this is 2016, remind you, how would the Chinese feel and how would the Russians feel because they've got the quote unquote enemy are right there at their borders. There's however many countries, you could count them. Um, whereas the U.S. really doesn't have that problem.
Hmm.
There's distance there and
There is,
all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
so it's like you're we're trying to think about you know it's not necessarily completely about trust, but it may be about trying to wear their shoes a little bit. I mean,
hmm,
how would you feel if you had, all of these munitions and stuff kind of aimed at you and that sort of thing? Um, so again, that's where I think if we can get past some of the misinformation stuff, um, and simply be a little bit more open and transparent, but everybody has to participate.
yeah, absolutely.
Um,
I think, I think, if we start, I think I try to be I try to be hopeful because there's no other option, right? Like I refuse to be pessimistic about about the
the
network.
other option is not a good one,
It's not a good one at all, right?
for
So
for the species.
yeah, exactly. And
It's just simply not good.
I like
So
human beings. Like I want us to
yeah, yeah,
I want us
right,
to I want us to thrive and like to recognize that this is not a zero sum game, right? Like we need to play this together,
correct,
right?
correct.
So
But like you say, you put it in the context of Sri Lanka. We can put it in the context of the entire globe that, well, we're doing this to ourselves. We've
yeah,
got huge ice shelves now falling off of Antarctica again.
yeah.
Um, these are these are wake up calls, and some of this should be fairly obvious.
Hmm.
Um, should we do this as step changes? Probably not. Yeah, it probably doesn't make sense to just completely stop, burning oil and that kind of stuff. But it does make sense to start thinking about what a future looks like,
And I
with
think
different methods to generate and move power. Um,
it's important like countries like America get its shit together because like countries like Sri Lanka, we know we look for example, we look for like you know people to look up to. Is like like what do you
right,
want? Like what kind of world do we want to live in? Like
right,
do you want to live in do you want countries like Sri Lanka looking up to China?
right,
Because like I personally I don't want that's not a world I want to live in because I'm not talking about anything. I'm just talking about just from a purely from a perspective of how they're using the technology that I'm trying to build, right?
right,
Because that's all I know. So I'm gonna
right,
stick to my role here, right?
right,
And I'm just gonna say like I am not cool with like what they're doing with the
right,
with the AI technology and with micro electronic technology, right? To basically subjugate and monitor their population. I'm
right,
not okay with that, right?
right.
And like like the world needs examples, and America is not looking too hard right now.
Oh
But
no, we've done a horrible job, especially over the last 5 years or so. I mean,
yeah.
it's been really we've if we've done nothing else, we've gone backwards,
Hmm.
which is I'm really sad to say that. It's just
I'm sad
we're
to hear that.
not
Like I'm sad about that. Like
we're not we're not collectively we're not thinking straight right now.
agreed.
We just aren't.
I
It's
agree.
just it's it's not healthy, and like you say, it's not providing the example that at least I believe gives the rest of the world hope.
Right.
That
Exactly. Exactly. That is exactly what we need. That's precisely what we need.
yeah,
Like I didn't even like speaking of like the future and how to build it. I didn't even get to ask you about Polytechnic High School. or
Oh, yeah.
that's like okay. I have to ask you before I let you go because like that seems super interesting to me. So what was the what's the story there? Like what's Purdue doing with this high school?
Well, I mean, they're just taking a lot of the techniques, I guess, of the Polytechnic, a lot of the learn by doing, a lot of that kind of thing, even some of the, the competency based and competency like um, uh, reviewing of students and that sort of thing, and taking it to the high school level. Um, and I think they're up to, I don't know, 3 or 4 different locations now
That's crazy.
within the state of Indiana, and apparently it's working.
That's
Um,
great. I'm very happy to hear that.
yeah, so hopefully if hopefully it's a good thing, and
I gotta
students
say,
that might not otherwise get the chance get a
true.
chance.
I gotta say, like, America aside, like, I have nothing but good. Like, I'm always proud of Purdue. Like, it's so nice to be to be part of that school, to have been part of that school. It just, like, I'm just happy that I got the experience because I learned so many valuable things, and like, it didn't occur to me at the time when I was learning it. That's the problem. But
Well, I actually had a very wise. It was the second hardest course I took. The first hardest course I took was the advanced version of that course. The course I'm talking about is an algorithms class in computer
Mhm.
science. So you're analyzing computer algorithms mathematically and all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
very tough class. But the instructor of that course said something very profound to me. And again, this is while I was working. He said, that basically the last 3 weeks of stuff that I'm teaching you, you're not going to even get for the next 3 to 6 weeks. So he said, and it's like, and that's extremely true. And then the thing that I've taken from, frankly, a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from students, like yourself, but those that graduated with you and some before you and some after you, I hear from them from time to time, and um, they're thankful. The first words are, you were right about whatever. Um, but the second thing is typically they're glad that they were at least somewhat prepared,
Right.
for that thing. And really, that's probably the best compliment you can get. It's not that you were right about something. That has nothing to do with it. It's just that the things that you try to impart still are some of the right things
Right. Right.
because they still
Exactly.
matter.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
and so whenever you process it or are confronted with something and it's like, oh yeah, I remember hearing about that, and you take that next step, that's really what matters.
Absolutely.
It's not that you leave a place, you know, knowing it all, because you leave with your bachelor's degree, and again, I'm 40 plus years past it. It's like you really don't know anything.
Yeah.
You've got a
Precisely.
couple some experience on top of that, and then all of a sudden some of the pieces start to fall into place. You connect the dots, and
For sure.
and you pursue your version of human happiness.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't thank you enough for taking this time to help me move towards that my pursuit of human happiness because this has been amazing. And like it's just yeah,
Well,
it's just
hopefully
it's just
you've
great.
got hopefully you've got enough material there that
Oh, it's great.
You can either edit pieces out or
No, no,
use.
no.
We can do this again sometime, and you can
Absolutely,
take some bits
absolutely.
out, and
I
we'll.
like I definitely wanted to talk to you so much more stuff. Like I wanted to like talk, but I like proper technical stuff. But this has been great. Like next time we'll talk about some like actual system stuff because I'm like interested in how these things work. And again, uh, thank you. I just wanted to thank you for your time. Also, thank you for like being such a great educator and like teaching me stuff when I was just like a know nothing some 20 something year old. So that was it's been an experience
Well,
all around.
hopefully you got a decent foundation to the things that you're doing
Oh,
now,
absolutely,
and the
for
things that
sure.
you're doing now are just going to take you in so many great directions. I've got every confidence.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. All right. Well, yeah, thank you for your time, and we'll definitely
Absolutely,
do this again soon.
absolutely.
All
We'll
right.
do it again.
Absolutely. All right. See ya.
All right.
Thank you for joining me in this conversation. I hope you got something out of it. And until next time.